What is your favorite history is stranger than fiction fact? The entire Taiping Rebellion, a war started by a Chinese peasant who dreamed and believed he was Jesus' younger brother. Although poor, the first thing he did was have a giant demon-slaying sword forged, took over a city, asked the British why they wouldn't pay him tribute as the new head of their faith, engaged in total war with the Qing, applied pseudo-communist policies like abolishing private property, separated women and men from ever interacting, and sent the women to the front lines. Over 20 million people died, with some estimates as high as 40 million. I did a research paper on them. My professor thought I was making crap up. Roman Emperor Caligula once marched his entire army towards the English Channel in an effort to invade Britain. Upon arrival to the Channel, he decided that he no longer wished to invade Britain, so he ordered his men to collect seashells before heading home. Right, that's the strangest thing Caligula did. Mine comes from the Civil War. The first battle of the Civil War took place at Bull Run on Wilmer McLean's farm. Fed up with the war and for the protection of his family, he moved 120 miles away to Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. On the 9th of April, 1865, a messenger knocked on his door to ask if they could use his house to negotiate the conditions of the South's surrender. The war started in his backyard and ended in his parlor. Fun fact, he actually moved 3 times, and the second time his house was demolished by cannon fire from a nearby Civil War battle. Napoleon faced his greatest defeat not at the hands of the Duke of Wellington's army at Waterloo, but at the hands of bunny rabbits. It was a fine summer in 1807. Napoleon was in high spirits, having signed the Peace of Tilsit, and to celebrate, Napoleon suggested that the imperial court should enjoy a lavish rabbit hunt, organized by his trusted chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier. Berthier was so keen to impress that he had bought hundreds of rabbits to ensure that the imperial court had plenty to shoot at. Satisfied that nothing could possibly go wrong, Berthier waited calmly for the guests to take their position. The shoot commenced, and the rabbits were released by the gamekeepers. But disaster struck. Instead of scattering in all directions, the horde of rabbits suddenly turned and charged on Napoleon. Confronted by this flood of rabbits, the emperor's escort formed a skirmish line to protect him. But, in the words of historian David Chandler, with a finer understanding of Napoleonic strategy than most of his generals, the rabbit horde divided into 2 wings and poured around the flanks of the party. As the emperor fled to the relative safety of his coach, the rabbits pursued, some allegedly even leaping into it, so that he had to lend a hand in ejecting them even as his coachmen whipped up their horses. In the aftermath, it transpired that Berthier, despite all his attention to detail, had procured not wild rabbits, but domesticated ones. Thus, when they espied the emperor and his coach coming towards them, they thought he was their keeper bringing good things to eat and acted accordingly. That is the cutest thing I have ever heard. Pisistratus got Athens to make him a dictator by getting a hot chick to pretend to be Athena and say they should let him rule them. At the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea, the Bishop of Smyrna, who would later be known as Good Old Saint Nicholas, became so enraged with Arius, who preached a doctrine that did not believe in the Holy Trinity, he punched him in the face and knocked him to the ground in the council hall. He was then thrown in prison by Emperor Constantine, and only freed after his fellow bishops has visions of Jesus demanding it. TLDR. Santa punched a dude in the face over a Jesus dispute. I love telling people that the Trinity and the divine nature of Christ are only features of Western Christianity because Santa Claus decked a guy. Ernest Hemingway was once in a plane crash in Africa. The entire crew and passengers were considered dead and newspapers the world over printed obituaries for him. A day later, he and a few of the other survivors walked out of the jungle and were put on a plane to be flown out for medical attention. That plane crashed shortly after takeoff and caught fire, at which point Papa broke out the windows in the cabin with his head and everyone on board escaped. He also won 2 military medals in his life, one from Italy and one from the US, and he never once picked up a gun in battle. He used to shotgun sharks so that they wouldn't interfere with his fishing. After the British burned the White House during the War of 1812, DC got hit with a hurricane and a tornado at the same time. Someone got bored playing SimCity 1800. In the 1600s, Prices of tulip bulbs in the Netherlands were so high that they cost the same as a house. People saw that the prices were rising, so they decided to invest in tulips. So prices continued to rise. When the highest price bulb failed to sell, it caused a massive crash in prices. This is one of the first examples of financial bubble. Oahe is the oldest spelling of Hawaii, and there is a river in the remote high desert of eastern Oregon called the Oahe River because it was first explored in 1819 by some Hawaiians. Lived in Oregon my entire life and never knew this. Thank you. The Russian intelligence agency, GRU, after World War II began a program to blackmail American servicemen into betraying their country. Basically, they opened up gay bars near military bases. In one sense, the program was a failure since most gay servicemen chose to come out of the closet and betray their country. But in another sense, the program was a raging success. Turns out that gay bars were very profitable, a good way of providing the GRU with much needed foreign currency. So, of course, the KGB, the GRU's sister rival organization, wanted in on the action. So from the 1960s through to the 1990s, almost all American military bases had 2 Russian-run gay bars nearby, and they were always on the off-limits list given to servicemen. They weren't generating any useful intelligence, but nobody in the crew and KGB cared because they were cash cows. Since the KGB was there to make money and didn't give a dang about American laws anyway, they also became major players in the drug trafficking trade. The crew-run bars seem to have stayed out of this. Then when the Soviet Union collapsed and the KGB was disbanded, the former KGB agents involved in the gay bays and drug trafficking operations became the core group of the new Russian mafia. While Hitler was campaigning, one of the strongest appeals he had to citizens was one of woman rights. Women fainted in front of Hitler like the Beatles. He is shockingly charismatic in films of his speeches. It's terrifying. Rasputin's death. Poisoned, but didn't die. So he went after the guys who poisoned him, and they stabbed him. Still didn't die. Kept going after the assassins. So they shot him, and though they finished him, his eyes open and he lunges for one of the assassins to strangle him. So they shoot him some more. This time he starts to crawl away. They beat the frick out of him, tie him up, throw him in a sack, and throw the sack into the river. 2 days later the sack was recovered, and it looked like Rasputin almost escaped his bindings and clawed out of the bag. On top of it all, while his body was being burned, the tendons shrunk and he sat up in the fire. They also cut off his penis. Simo Häyhä. He was a Finnish sniper during the Winter War, 1939 to 1940, with Russia. He stood only 5 feet 3 inches, and was only active for about 100 days of the war, but he worked in temperatures that almost never rose above -20 degrees Celsius, and often fell to -40 degrees. At this point, he was 20 years old, and had only about a year of military experience, none of which involved actual combat. He killed between 505 to 712 Red Army soldiers during the war, differs in different sources, using only a bolt-action rifle, iron sights, no scope, and possibly a Russian submachine gun. He was called the White Death by the Red Army, due to his homemade, camouflaged outfit that helped him blend in with the snows. The Russians tried various tactics to kill him, including counter-snipers and artillery bombardments that leveled the forests in which he was hiding. Eventually, however, a Russian soldier was able to hit him in the face with a round with an explosive charge. I'm not sure if that's accurate, as to my knowledge nothing of that sort existed at that point. Said shot blew off most of his left cheek. Edit. Before passing out, Simo shot and killed the only man to successfully shoot him. Moral of the story: if you shoot a man known for killing everyone, you make sure you kill him. He did not die, but rather entered a coma that he emerged from the day that peace was declared. He died in 2003, at the age of 96. TLDR. Finnish sniper with no combat experience killed over 500 Red Army soldiers over a period of 100 days with a scopeless rifle, before surviving a bullet to the face. To expand, the reason he didn't use a scope was because both the sun glare off it stood out, and it required a higher posture than using iron sights. He also put snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from showing up. Napoleon, what a freaking guy, decides that he wants to be emperor, and does it. The best moment is when he took the crown out of the Pope's hands to crown himself emperor so that no one would be above his authority. That actually freaking happened. This dude was unreal. A luxury liner embarks on her first voyage with much fanfare, only to hit an iceberg and capsize. Sound familiar? But this isn't an account of the RMS Titanic. This is the plot of The Wreck of the Titan, a novella written by Morgan Robertson. Wreck was published in 1898, more than a decade before the real-life wreck of the Titanic. The similarities between the fictional and the real life are astounding. Both were considered glorious feats of modern engineering, were touted as being practically unsinkable, contained less than half the number of lifeboats required, and were struck by icebergs on their starboard side, taking half of their passengers' lives. Finally, both the Titan and the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic Ocean on a night in April. Pretty late publicity stunt. There was a soldier in the Vietnam War whose name escapes me but called Roy Benavidez. Thanks you Chanbam. He got shot something like 7 times, his entire body was lacerated by frag grenade shrapnel, his eyes were glued shut with blood. He had been stabbed in the hand and all the way through his forearm with a bayonet and was holding his intestines in his hands. He was pronounced dead on arrival back at his base, at which point he spat blood in the doctor's face as he couldn't move or speak. He alone saved an entire squad. He was awarded a frick load of medals but not the Medal of Honor as his commanding officer didn't think he'd live long enough to revisit it. He was awarded it several years later after his CO found out he had survived the war. Roy Benavidez. Just watched a YouTube video on this the other day. Tiberius, the second Roman emperor, was an absolute nutter. In his retirement to Capri, he saw 2 young boys that he liked the look of. One was something like 7, the other around 13ish. He asked his mother if he could leave the banquet to have sex with them. She said something along the lines of eat your dinner first. So he speedily finished a Roman banquet and proceeded to break the 2 boys' legs and rape them. This is the same emperor who got so scared by a fish that a local fisherman presented to him that he scaled a cliff and ordered guards to rub the scaly fish into the fisherman's face until he bled. Someone tried to assassinate President Jackson. When the gun misfired, Jackson proceeded to beat the man with a cane. You are forgetting that David Crockett was in on that beating. Read anything about George Washington in the Revolutionary War. Either he is the luckiest man to walk this earth, or he was a demigod sent to create America. He was also amazingly militarily inept in his first campaign, back during the French and Indian War. He set up a fort outside modern Pittsburgh, at the bottom of a valley, as he believed it was the most defendable position. A good portion of his troops drowned in a rainstorm that flooded the fort. Vlad the Impaler would impale his enemies on lances and leave them alive dying all around his castle grounds as a statement to his people and would-be enemies. A lot more about Vlad Tep 3, very interesting read. I think the Ottoman Empire's army turned around when they saw that Vlad had impaled a bunch of his own people. I am too lazy to find the source right now. During the shooting of the movie Another Time, Another Place, 1957, in England, Sean Connery was on the set with Lana Turner. Her abusive boyfriend, gangster Johnny Stompanato, was jealous and came onto the set, pointing a gun at Connery. Connery responded by grabbing the gun, twisting Stompanato's arm till he dropped it, and the guy ran off with Connery telling him he better leave Lana Turner alone. Sean Connery, badass in real life. It's not a particularly unknown fact, but just that tiny moment in the Valkyrie plot when the suitcase fell and was replaced by a helpful non-plot member on the other side of the table leg from where it had been leaning. That always blows my mind, that such a seemingly inconsequential thing could leave such ripples throughout history. In case anyone doesn't know, whilst there were other reasons why the Valkyrie plot failed, it's generally agreed upon that if the case had been in its original position, Hitler would probably have been killed by the blast. As it happened, the thick leg shielded him and he survived for another year. I realize the whole Nazi regime wouldn't have just collapsed without him whilst there were so many prominent Nazis still alive to take his place. But it indubitably meant that 1944 to 1945 year, and probably many subsequent ones if you factor in the lives of all the people that were killed or survived because of Hitler's orders in that year, was vastly different to what it could have been if the plot had succeeded. To sum up, Yeah, I find it really bizarre how little things like that can reverberate through the world like that. I appreciate the actual occurrences weren't amazingly stranger than fiction, but I always feel that their effects were. Either that or that George Duke of Clarence, brother of Edward IV of England, requested drowning in a barrel of Malmsey wine as his execution method when he was charged with treason. It's so bizarre and characterful. He was mad as a hatter and, I get the impression, not the nicest fella in the world, but you can't deny he had flair. On the 30th of March, 1981, there was an assassination attempt on President Reagan. Jerry Parr was one of the Secret Service agents on duty. In fact, he was the one that pushed President Reagan into the limousine after hearing the gunshots while driving back to the White House. Standard procedure, since at the time it was believed the president was uninjured. Agent Parr noticed that the president was bleeding and ordered the limo to immediately turn around and go to George Washington Hospital. This decision no doubt saved President Reagan's life. Agent Parr had wanted to be in the Secret Service since a young boy when he watched a 1939 movie called Code of the Secret Service, with a young unknown actor playing the part of Agent Brass Bancroft. That actor made some more movies and eventually entered politics, becoming governor of California and later President of the United States. Indeed, a young Ronald Reagan played a role in a movie which caused a young boy to make a career choice and then saved the actor president's own life 42 years later. The story is recounted in a book written by Peggy Noonan when character was King. Page 195 in my copy. Ms. Noonan was a speechwriter and assistant to President Reagan. My personal favorite, quoted from Wikipedia, Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Jack Churchill, nicknamed Fighting Jack Churchill and Mad Jack, was a British soldier who fought throughout World War II armed with a longbow, arrows, and a Scottish broadsword. He is known for the motto, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly armed. Yes, you read that right. He fought the war by leading his men into battles as a lieutenant colonel armed with medieval weapons. He also survived the entire war to die many years later at age 89. BAMF. Damn it. This is certain to be buried because I really love this one. Timur the Lame Tamerlane was one of the Mongol conquerors of Asia. He was buried in a tomb in Samarkand, with the inscription, whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I. It has been definitively opened only once, by Soviet archaeologists on the 20th of June, 1941. 2 days before Hitler invaded the USSR. He was reburied in November 1942, which nicely coincides with the beginning of the Battle of Stalingrad and the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany. This one is my favorite. That a 5'7" 20-year-old became king of nobles in the army, and would over the next 11 years become one of the greatest generals in all of human history. He would often be outnumbered, but his tactics and strategy would help him remain undefeated in battle throughout his life. I of course am talking about Alexander of Macedon. Most people don't even know what career they want when they are in their 20s. Fun fact, Alexander of Macedon and Napoleon were the same height. Alexandrian complex? I'm guessing 5'7" foot would have been tall for antiquity. I live in a medieval town, and most of the doors of the remaining houses are too low for me, and I'm smaller than Napoleon. World War I was only started because the assassin of Archduke Franz Ferdinand decided to stop for a sandwich after a hard day of failing to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This one is definitely my favorite, clearly a case of failing upwards. During World War II on the Pacific Front, 9 airmen escaped from their planes after being shot down during bombing raids on Shishijima, a tiny island 700 miles south of Tokyo, in September 1944. One escaped. The horrific fate of the other 8 flyboys was established in subsequent war crimes trials on the island of Guam, but details were sealed in top-secret files in Washington to spare their families distress. It has established that they were tortured, beaten and then executed, either by beheading with swords or by multiple stab wounds from bayonets and sharpened bamboo stakes. 4 were then butchered by the island garrison surgeons and their livers and meat from their thighs eaten by senior Japanese officers. The other airman escaped a similar fate because he ditched his plane further from the island than the other crews, and managed to scramble onto a life raft, American planes launched a hail of fire at Japanese boats which set out to capture him, driving them back, and he was eventually rescued by a US submarine. He later became the 41st President of the United States. Up until World War I, there were millions of native-born Americans, mainly concentrated in the Midwest, whose native language was German, not English, and mostly spoke German in everyday speech. There were thousands of German-language newspapers and magazines. Then anti-German sentiment caused by World War I caused the end of all that. A Japanese soldier continued fighting in a remote Philippine forest until the 70s. The guy was alone for nearly 30 years and refused to put down his weapon until his CO came and said the war was over, despite several letters airdropped to him saying the war had ended. Just prior to the completion of the atomic bomb, America was developing a lot of weapons and plans, many of which never saw the battlefield. The one invention and plan that came closest to being put into effect was bats with tiny napalm bombs surgically attached. They would be anesthetized and placed in a bomb made of different layers that would open a parachute and separate and free the bats. They would then fly into the eaves of the very wood-heavy architecture of Japan. They made it. It worked on all the mock Japanese buildings and testing, and predicted more damage and casualties than the firebombing of Dresden. This plan had a go-ahead, until we decided to use the nuke. Instead, TLDR, napalm bats in World War II. Prior to the sacking of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire's naval fleet was kept out of the bay by an enormous chain set in place by the Byzantines. Yes, like an A-clash of kings. To circumvent this, the Ottomans purportedly pulled their ships onto log beds, rolled them across land and launched them back into the water on the other side of the chain. Not really a history is stranger than fiction fact, and more of a wow that's such a random connection fact, but one of my favorite historical tidbits is about the invention of the CT scanner. Godfrey Hounsfield, the man who invented the machine, did all the work while being an R&D at EMI, a British music company which had nothing to do with medical equipment in the slightest until the CT scanner. They had enough money to support Hounsfield's research because of the success of a number of bands they signed, including the Beatles. So if you're ever wondering who was truly behind the CT scanner, well, you could say it was the Beatles. Source: Naked to the Bone by Betty Ann Kevills, as well as a class on medical imaging. Pretty much the whole Henry VIII saga, the history buff in me fact-checked every aspect of the Tudors series, other than combining his sisters into one character, switching a pope around, and a select few side storylines. The whole thing is allegedly accurate, down to the small interactions and personalities of the characters. I mean, an entire nation's major religion, Church of England, was created solely so some dude could marry his crush because she wouldn't put out otherwise. Then he killed her. That by 1815, the United States had already waged 2 wars against Algeria. I'm a PhD in American history and this still baffles me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.